In 1956, Gordy Sundin was 17 years old. He was 6'4", 200 pounds, with movie star good looks. He was a four-sport athlete, piercing blue eyes, and a wicked fastball. He could knock him out anywhere, any way you sliced it. Well, he got a phone call as a senior in high school. He got a call from the Baltimore Orioles, professional Major League Baseball. This is 1956. It was a really big deal. And the first time they flew him to Chicago to meet his agent was the first time he had ever been outside of his hometown in Minnesota. No idea what the big world had to offer him. They signed him. And so they brought him up through the ranks. They brought him up through single A ball and double A ball and triple A ball. He played in Phoenix for a while. He played in Vancouver for a bit. There was a little bit in the Deep South where he was traveling around for a while. And then he got his big break. In the summer of 1957, Tiger Stadium, Detroit. They were opening against the Detroit Tigers. And he opened that game. He was the starter, and he got out there. He didn't have a great game. They earned a run off of him. And then the coach relieved him in the 7th inning. So he ended the game with a negative ERA, no win, no loss. That was the only game he ever pitched as a Baltimore Oriole. In the spring of 1958, he hurt his elbow. And today, no big deal. Pinched nerve, they have surgery for that. They have arthroscopic work that they can do on it. But in 1957, 58, 59, they had no idea what to do. There was nothing they could do for him. So they gave him some time to work it off. They sent him back to Phoenix. They sent him back to Vancouver. Funny story, while he was in Phoenix, he was in the dugout. He was getting ready to pitch a game, and he heard an announcement over the loudspeaker. Congratulations to Gordy Sundin. His wife gave birth to a little baby girl this morning. And that's how he learned about the birth of his first child. Well, the elbow didn't heal. And he slipped down to double A. He slipped down to single A. And at the end of the 59 season, they released him. Now he's just a young man, barely 20, 21 years old. He has a wife and a baby girl. Sports is all he's ever known. He really has no idea what he's going to do with the rest of his life. Now he's got a little money from playing professional baseball, and so he invests it into a bar with a couple of friends. They go back to Minneapolis and they bought a bar, and he drank all the profits. Gordy doesn't remember the 60s. Now his wife had 3 little girls that grew up to be beautiful, strong, intelligent, well-educated young women and had beautiful families of their own. And Gordy finally got himself back together. He went through treatment, and his wife, just a 4'11" ball of fire that she went through the treatment with him. She walked him through, she held his hand through the whole thing, and they got their lives back together. He got a job in sales with the Campbell Soup Company out of Minneapolis, and he made himself a fabulous living. He retired well. He retired to a beautiful home in South Florida, and some of his kids moved down there. Some of them lived in big cities and married into wealthy families. When I met Gordy, it was 2014. He was terminally ill. His liver was giving out on him. And in the summer of 2015, I got a call from his daughter, and she said, listen, Dad doesn't have much longer to live. We want to get his story on video. We want to hear him tell his stories his way. We want people to know about some of the things that he went through. And so I got my camera and the lights and the microphone and the whole thing, and we went to his home. It was actually a transitional place. They had sold the house, and their condo on the beach wasn't quite ready yet, so they were in this transitional apartment. So we went, and I turned on the cameras, and for 2 hours, we laughed, we cried. He told me a story about going camping up in the north of Canada, and there was a bear and 2 people buck naked and a canoe and a 6-pack of beer. You have to hear him tell the story. I could never do it justice. So we just had the best time as he related his stories. We talked about the alcohol, we talked about baseball, we talked about unfulfilled aspirations. And then when it was pretty obvious that he was getting tired, I reached up and I shut off the camera, and he leaned into me in his wheelchair and he looked at me and he said, "Young man, I have never told anybody some of the things I said to you today." And I knew that I had something, I didn't have a business on my hands. I had a gift to give him and his family. Well, I knew that time was short. So went home, and over the next couple of days, we got all the footage together, we cleaned it up, put a little music underneath it. His daughter sent me some family photos from throughout the years, pictures of his parents, pictures of him growing up, I had a picture of his baseball card, 1957 Baltimore Orioles baseball card. Pretty neat. Signed. And so we got this all together, and I got the video ready, and I put it up on YouTube, and I sent it to the daughters. Well, they had a family gathering. So imagine, if you will, here's Gordy sitting like a king in his wheelchair, Mary Ann sitting at his side, his 3 beautiful daughters, their husbands, all the grandkids. They're all gathered around to watch Gordy tell his story on the big screen. And it was a beautiful day. He said some terrific things about each of his kids, each of the husbands, each of the grandkids. And they really had a nice time with it. And 3 days later, he moved to heaven. And so his grandkids obviously knew him a little bit because they would come down to visit, but they never really had that real close one-on-one time with him. But from now on, they will always have him on video telling his stories the way only he could. And so that was an important thing that we were able to give to his family. I'd like to do a little exercise, and it's going to involve some moving around. This isn't just going to be me talking the whole time. I want you to find somebody that you don't know. And in 3 minutes, I want you to find out 2 pieces of information. I want you to get their name, and I want you to get one interesting tidbit about their life, one interesting fact about their life. It can be where you went to school, it can be a job that you had, it could be something your husband did, or something one of your kids did, something one of your parents did. So find someone that you don't already know, and that would be better. I'd like you to meet somebody that you've never met, and I want you to tell them your name and that one interesting tidbit about you. And okay, well, I'll be the odd man out then, so why don't you come visit with me? And so tell me your name. You're Linda. Yes, ma'am. Linda, what's sort of one of your interesting stories from your life? You got to share one with me earlier that was really kind of neat. Yeah.
We lived overseas for
Where?
7 years. Scotland, Norway, Italy, Lebanon.
Wow. Military? No?
Beirut, and then Texaco.
Okay. Oil. Fantastic. Yeah.
Another interesting thing about him was he played for Coach Bill at the University of Texas.
Okay.
The first group of recruits he ever had. And he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he didn't play. He decided he wasn't big enough.
Oh my God. No, that is fascinating, and how fun to be, to have some of those opportunities. What was your favorite place that you ever lived?
Oh, Scotland.
Yeah. What was it about Scotland?
People.
Yeah.
Beautiful, but we live in everything.
Oh, magnificent.
But it's wonderful place.
Lots and lots and lots of history.
Yeah.
Magnificent history there.
And we just miss all of that. And I know about you that you moved here from Minnesota, so tell me what else about you. Where did you go to college? Something?
I did. I went to college to be a high school band director, which I've never done.
But you still like music?
I do. I enjoy music, and I was in radio for several years, and had a lot of fun with that. Actually, when I met my wife, I was in radio, and she was a front desk receptionist for a building company, and she was making more than I was. So I'm going to get that kid. Yes, yes, ma'am. All right. So I'd like to pull it all back together. And now, if you don't mind, what I'd like to do is just go around the room, and would you just say a quick word to introduce me to the person next to you?
Okay, this is Kathy Ballard,
Kathy.
and Kathy earned a curved bar in the Girl Scouts, and she tells me that that is equivalent to an Eagle Scout.
Sure, sure. So Eagle Scout equivalent among Girl Scouts. Fabulous.
It's called a curved bar.
The curved bar.
Wow. Yeah, they haven't done it. I don't know how long they did away with it. Maybe
Yeah, yeah. How about that? Awesome. And who did you meet, Kathy?
I met Linda Rigby,
Mhm.
and in 1971, she ran for the city council in an East Texas town and won, and that was before women were running for office.
Wow.
And she was invited to the first International Women's Year conference, and it was held at the LBJ Library in downtown.
Congratulations. In 1971, I was wearing diapers. Boo! No. It was a great year. It was Walt Disney World opened in 1971, the Hard Rock Cafe. See, it was a good year, and women broke the glass ceiling in Texas politics right here in our midst.
And I had a beautiful daughter.
See, that's awesome. Beautiful. Did she go on to be a Girl Scout?
Yes, she did,
Okay.
but she didn't earn that kind of badge.
Not at that level. No, that's awesome. Next.
I met Diane Naylor.
Okay.
She lives in Hunt,
Mm-hmm.
but she grew up on a ranch
Okay.
and very isolated, like 80 miles from, and yes.
Well, out in Hunt, 80 miles is the driveway. Am I right?
I asked her if they had cattle, and she said, yeah, her dad raised cattle and farmed.
Wow. Awesome. Kathy, who did you meet?
I met Betsy Lett, and she lives here now, but she moved here recently from Kentucky, Illinois. And she was a teacher, a foods teacher in high school.
Oh, neat.
And so that's neat.
Hmm. I was going to say, now they call it home economics, but now they don't even do it.
Well, they used to
Yeah.
used to call it.
When I was, yeah,
family
And then it was family consumer science.
family consumer science.
Now they don't even teach it?
A lot of schools just let it go, but they let wood shop and metal shop and home ec and all of these great programs. Some of them don't have art and music programs anymore because you got to get those math scores up. If I get a good math score and I can't sing, I'm not going to be much fun anyway. So who really cares, right? Fantastic. Next.
I met Mary Ann Christensen, and she is visiting us while our house in Nebraska is underwater.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And she has a son down here, and he's a ER nurse at her hospital. And she's a retired nurse. And let's see, she has 10 kids. No, 10 grandkids and 2 great-grandkids.
Wow. That's awesome. Where in Nebraska?
I'm in northeast Nebraska, about 40 miles west of Sioux City, Iowa.
Oh, okay. Okay, so north of Lincoln and Seward and all of that.
But, yeah,
Okay. Well, I am so sorry that you are displaced by the big water,
oh,
but I hope that you find it at home here.
I definitely do.
Good. How long has your son lived here?
For 20 years.
Wow. Okay, so you're fairly familiar with this area.
I come down.
That's awesome. And who did you meet?
Okay, I met Carol, and her last name is Lemons, and she says that is an odd name for an art teacher. She's a retired art teacher, and tomorrow is her birthday.
Happy
And
birthday.
I won't tell you, she told me how old she's going to be. But I will tell you that she's younger than I am.
Wow.
From Maya?
Pardon me?
What did you say last?
I said she is younger than I am.
Oh,
You know, it just occurred to me when you have an art teacher named Lemon, what's the first thing the first project that you do, the first still life? No. You paint oranges.
Still lives. Actually, this bridge should have on the world, but it shrunk and changed colors
Sure.
badly.
I understand entirely. No, that's fantastic. And next, who did you meet?
I met Chad.
Yeah, she met me. Odd man out. She got me.
He has been here for about 3 years. He moved here from Minnesota.
Hmm.
And he met his wife in Florida. He's been in radio. And he has 4 children. He went to school, he was going to be a music major.
I was a music major. Yeah, I was gonna be a high school band director, and I didn't finish my education credentials, so I didn't ever get to teach. So,
But we didn't get him to sing anything yet.
yeah, not yet. We'll just keep working on that. Yeah, I was gonna be a band director, but the semester that they offered the introduction to education curriculum, before you could go on to have the education program, you had to take this course. Well, they were offering a course in England at the time, so I took that. And I said, well, I'll make it up later. I'll stay for a 5th year. Famous last words. So, anyway, yeah, I also had the privilege of meeting Linda, and Linda has not only lived here in Texas, but she's lived in Scotland and Norway and Lebanon and countless places all over the world, because her husband was in the oil and gas industry for many, many years. Interesting tidbit about him, he played at North Texas. Did I say that? No. At the University of Texas. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's like somebody told me, Florida, University of Florida, Florida State. No, you don't ever mess that up. But he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Didn't play because he didn't feel he was big enough, but he got his name called professional football, so kind of a big deal. So that was neat. So now you've had an opportunity to find out something fascinating about another person that you had never met previously, and you have people in your life that are just as fascinating. And some of us have people that we think we know really well because we're with them all the time, or at one point in our lives we were with them all the time and we felt like we knew them, and yet they kind of had some surprises that went with them. I have done several of these interviews now with people, with seniors, and as they tell their life story, one of my favorites was Laverne, and I forgot I had a copy of Laverne's DVD. It was fascinating. She was 85 years old. She had 4 kids that she raised out on the wild prairie of western Minnesota back in the 50s. They didn't even have plumbing or electricity come to their house until some years later. So raising kids with, out on the prairie. But the funny thing is, I was there when I presented the DVD to her, and all of the kids were there because they knew it was a surprise for her, but when it was ready. But we sat and we watched it all together, and I'll never forget, mind you, her kids are in their 50s and 60s, and on the video she said some things, and the kids looked at her and she goes, when was that? I don't remember. I didn't know Dad did that. I didn't know when we moved from this town to this town. I guess I never really knew why. I knew that Dad had lost his job at the grain elevator, but I never knew the story behind it. We just knew he was gone and he took a job in another town. Well, she got to tell some of the backstory and why it happened, and the other person that was involved in it, and the mess that it made. Well, they'd never heard that side of the story. These are in their 60s listening to their mom. And so there are stories in our lives that we might not even know about. Some of us have war heroes in our families. Some of us have just the most tremendous stories. We have, educations, or we have traveled to foreign countries, I didn't know you did that. When did you do that? Well, back before you were born, I had a life. See, your dad and I were interesting people before you came along. How many of us have heard those kinds of things? But what would you give? I want you to think of somebody in your life right now that has gone on. Everybody in here, I think, probably has somebody in their life that has gone on that you would love to spend an afternoon with again. And just ask them, whatever happened with and how did this work? And as I was thinking about this, there were a couple of movie clips that came to mind. See if you can relate to any of these. Where'd you go?
Oh, McFly, your shoes are tied. Don't be so gullible, McFly. I want to see you in here. Okay. All right, bye-bye.
Now you know the story here. That is his dad. And he went back in time, in a time machine, and he's looking at his teenage dad. Well, you can imagine what's going through his mind right now.
What? You're George McFly.
You may or may not have seen this movie, but this is a young man who, his father was a king in Africa and was murdered. And he has an opportunity to go back in time, or not back in time, but to visit him in heaven. What would you ask him? What would you tell him? What would you want him to know?
I'm sorry. Stand up. You are a king.
You see, he lives in you. Father?
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are. Remember.
No, please, don't leave me. Father! Don't leave me.
Remember the last time we had a quiet drink? Hmm? I had a milkshake. What did we talk about? We didn't talk. We never talked. Do I detect a rebuke? A regret? It's just the two of us, Dad. It was a lonely way to grow up. For you, too. If you'd been an ordinary, average father like the other guys' dads, you'd have understood that.
Actually, I was a wonderful father. Did I ever tell you to eat up, go to bed, wash your ears, do your homework? No, I respected your privacy, and I taught you self-reliance.
What you taught me was that I was less important to you than people who've been dead for 500 years in another country. And I learned it so well that we've hardly spoken for 20 years.
You left just when you were becoming interesting.
Dad, how
Well, I'm here now. What do you want to talk about?
Well, now what do you talk about? What do you say?
I can't think of anything. Then what are you complaining about? We have work to do.
If you build it, he will come.
Anybody remember this movie? I lived in Iowa when it came out.
God.
What is it?
It's my father. Ease his pain. Hey, Dad? You want to have a catch? I'd like that.
So, what would you say? What would you ask him? What would you want to talk about? In the interest of full disclosure, I spent half the afternoon sobbing my eyes out. I don't handle that movie very well. So, each of those fathers had a story. Each of those, and I apologize, I just realized all of the clips that came to mind were fathers and sons. And as a father of sons, it's very personal to me. But there's more. If we could sit with a mother, an aunt, an older sister, a teacher, a neighbor, most of us have someone that spoke into our lives at an early age that we would love to have that conversation with again. But more importantly, we have people in our lives that we would love to have that conversation with, and we still can't, and we must. Because there is something about where we came from that makes us who we are. And I believe that most of the challenges that we see with young people today stem from the absence of roots. We don't know where we came from, so we don't know who we are. We don't know what we belong to. For 6,000 years, families gathered around the campfire at night. They gathered around the dinner table. They gathered in their circle, and the elders told the stories of the family. And they told them over and over and over again until they were rooted down into who we are. I have a friend who is a rabbi, charming, sweet, sweet man, and he's got young children. And he tells the story of a father who, when he wakes his children up in the morning, I'm going to say this wrong now, I forget, it's either as he puts his children to bed or it says he wakes his children up in the morning. I think it's in the morning. He says, "Good morning. What is your name?" And the child says his name. "What family are you a part of?" And he gives the family name. "And what do we believe in as a family?" And they have a couple of points, bulleted points that the children have memorized. That's the values of the family. For centuries, families had crests. They had a shield, they had a lion, they had a cross, they had any of a number of symbols that were a part of the family crest that identified them for who they were. I knew when I got that crest emblazoned on my coat or my shield or whatever it was my brand, it was my representation of who I am and what I stand for and what I believe in. And there is something about that that gives us purpose. It gives us identity. And it's the absence of that that leaves people adrift. And some of that is just the fact that, in our jet set culture, people take jobs where the jobs are. We go off to college and, some of your kids may have gone off to Austin or to Dallas or to Abilene or to Boston or you know, wherever. You may have gone to Santa Fe. You may have gone to, you know, to Los Angeles to go to school. And so there is that transfer. And then they take a job, and the job takes them to New York or Chicago or Phoenix or where have you, or to Texas, right? Nebraska mom, son picks up, and he goes to Texas. When I was 21 years old and fresh out of college, my family was in the Minneapolis area, and I took a job in Fargo, North Dakota. Didn't seem like a big deal. It was far enough away for me to establish my own life, but it was close enough that I could go home for holidays. Well, I took a job up there, and that job promoted me to a job in South Florida. Well, now I'm 1,800 miles from home. I didn't go home that whole first year. In fact, the first time I went home was a whole year later for Christmas, and I brought my new wife with me. Boy, did I have some explaining to do. All right? And then from there, we raised our children down there. All my cousins and uncles and grandparents and sisters and brothers and their kids are all still back in Minneapolis, and all of them still are, most of them. And we were many miles away. And it's one of the great regrets of my life is that my children grew up detached from the root system, the value system. A lot of the, you know, they didn't know that family the way that they could have. And so in a daring and desperate attempt to reunify all that, I moved my family back to a home in Minneapolis, or outside of Minneapolis. And for 6 months, we had a great time getting to know our family again. And then I took a job in Kerrville. What are you going to do? So I like to, these are my boys, and I like to keep a reminder in front of me. This is actually at my parents' house in the Twin Cities. It was at Christmas time. And so there's a lot of interesting stories that go along with this lamp. And my stepdad's chair, which is right over here, and the couch that's behind me, all of them are filled with memories. All of them are filled with stories. And your lives are full of stories too. And so what are the kinds of stories that families have that get passed down? What are some of those things that we pass down from generation to generation? Anyone?
When they got married.
Important family events like weddings. Yeah, we pass those kinds of things. We pass funny stories. My grandma got married in July of 1949. Okay? It was the hottest summer on record in Minnesota, mind you, which means it was probably 65 degrees outside. Now, it was a blistering July day. Now, the church that they got married in was under construction. It wasn't finished yet, but the basement was finished. And so they had the wedding in the basement of the church because the sanctuary was still under construction. It wasn't safe. And hot, hot, hot July day. Now, my grandmother was the eighth of 9 children. So her mom had already been around the whole wedding thing enough times. So great-grandma had this fantastic idea. Instead of a big wedding cake, we're going to serve ice cream on a hot July day with no electricity or refrigeration. I didn't bother to mention that. No ice chest, no electricity in the building. You want to talk about a mess. You should hear Laverne talk about the wedding dress ice cream fiasco. At the moment, it was a disaster. Now, years later, it's one of the funny things that she loves to tell. And we all have these funny stories, and those funny stories pass down. What else passes down? Recipes. Holiday traditions. How many of you know something about the hard times that your parents went through, or that you remember when things were tight? When Dad was working 3 jobs, he was driving the milk truck, and then he would go and he was the custodian at the school, and then he'd bale hay in the evenings. Each of us has those times in our lives. Nobody's life is always just easy and fun and, well, okay, maybe some people's lives are just always easy. But most of us have times in our lives when things were tough and we didn't know how we were going to make it. and we slept on the floor, and the windows stayed broken for that whole winter. We all have times in our lives like that. And what do those times do in our lives? They create character. They create memories. Families tend to come together. They're going to come together, they're going to fly apart. But I think a lot of times when things are tough, people kind of come together. They rise to the challenge together. If mom and dad are strong, if we're going to, guys, we're going to have to tighten the belt a little bit, but we're going to make it. And I don't know how we're going to do it just yet, but we're going to get there. Each of us probably has sometimes either with our parents or in our own lives with our own kids when we weren't sure quite how we were going to make it. Or we took a job change that moved us to the other side of the planet. And we had some transitions that went along with that. And we maybe encountered some challenges with other cultures, challenges with neighbor kids, being the new girls in the neighborhood. I'm going to guess that those kinds of things came up. What other stories do families pass down?
Well, that just reminded me that sometimes my adult children will scratch their heads at some things that my husband will say or do. But I remind them that his parents lived through the Depression.
Right.
And so his value comes from dad.
Right.
Whereas our kids had it all. And they don't get it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. My grandfather had jars of rusty screws and nails on a shelf in the garage. Why? Some of them were unusable. Because you never know when you might need one. Boxes of hinges, door handles. You just never knew when you might need one. Grandma, till the day she died, had a freezer packed with food that she couldn't even eat on her diet. But she had it there just in case the economy fell out and we were ready. Well, if you don't understand the context that she grew up in, well, what are you going to do? One of my favorite types of stories is the How You Met Your Spouse story. And I went to a nursing home in Bernie. You may have, it's Heritage Place, beautiful little place in Bernie. And we spent the afternoon there, and we set up a camera, and we had some of the residents come in. And I said, tell me how you met your husband. It was mostly ladies. In fact, it was all ladies at that one. And Bernice came in, and she said, well, I went to the store one afternoon, and when I came home, there was a young man in my mother's kitchen in an army uniform, and I went to Mother and I said, Mother, what is that young man doing in my kitchen? And Mother said, why don't the two of you go for a little walk? I'd like you to meet him. His name is Howard, I'm pretty sure. Why don't you and Howard just go for a little walk? I'll take over in here. And we did, and we walked out into the south pasture, and would you believe it? He took my hand. I said, I don't know you, Howard. You want to hear a ribald story sometime? Give me a 94-year-old lady with no filter. You get some good stuff. But she married him, or he married her. They married each other. And they lived happily together for 56 years until cancer finally took him. But, I mean, those are the stories. How did you meet your husband? Mom set it up with a boy that came back from the army. He had just come back from a tour of service in Italy, and he was home. But boy, did he look sharp in those army browns. Boy, I tell you what, he was an officer. And, you know, each of us has a story of how we met our spouse. Like Linda mentioned, I was in radio for several years, and I had an afternoon show, and I'd play music, and I'd take requests, and people would call the station all the time, and they'd request a song. Well, after a while, you start to get to know some of the regulars. And there was one young lady that would call, and we'd talk for a little bit, and she was real sweet, and she'd request a song, and I'm like, okay, I'll play that for you. I'd get some freaks, too. I'd get some weirdos. People would call me up and say, the Lord told me that you and I are supposed to be married. I said, that's funny, I didn't get the message. But this one called, and we would visit on the phone a little bit. She was real sweet, real nice, and she was kind of working out what she was going to do with her life. She had some career choices ahead of her, and well, we just got to talking, and then I had an event that I had to be at, and it meant that I didn't have time. I got off the air. I had to go right to the event. I didn't have time to get supper. And so she called and she said, hey, did you get any supper tonight? No, just don't have time. I'll eat when I get done. I was 24, my wife 25. I'll eat at 11 o'clock at night. I don't care. Well, she went to my favorite restaurant because she knew. She knew what my favorite restaurant was. She knew what I liked to order there too. She went and she bought it. She drove an hour to this place where I had this event, and she brought me dinner. And she turned around and she went an hour home. Well, that leaves an impression on a guy. You don't have to do that too many times, and you start to make the connection there. And I won't get into all the details, but we dated for about 6 weeks, got married 21 years ago. So, and we have four children. That's her, actually. That's my beautiful wife. But each of us has a funny or quirky story, romantic story, whatever it might be, about how we met our Pittsburgh Steeler. Our big, tough football guy.
We worked at the same store.
The same store. Okay. Do your kids know that story? Okay.
I have one granddaughter that drove him crazy. Papa, how come you don't ever tell Noah you love her?
Oh, see.
She knows I love her. I'd give her my heart. Well, you don't ever tell her. I don't need to.
Right.
You should have some girls around.
Yeah, that's one thing. That's one thing we don't have, is we don't have girls. Now we have dogs and cats, but we don't have girls in my house. I know. I have 5 sisters. I understand. I have 5 sisters. My wife has 1 sister. Yeah, right? And so, but we have wisdom that we can share, that we can pass down from generation to generation. We have war stories. Some of us saw fields of action. Some of your spouses may have been in combat. We have advice. We have wisdom that passes down. You know, my grandma always said, my grandpa always said, my dad drove backwards up a hill all the way from, driving backwards uphill up the Medina Mountain because he knew that gas flowed down into the engine, and the only way he was going to make it back to the gas station was to keep the gas flowing downhill into the engine.
When I first heard that story, I thought they told me he'd back a wagon and a team up there, and I thought that was, how did you do that?
How do you back a team of horses up with a wagon?
I'm thinking, he must have had somebody. Well, it wasn't until I was a little later and they told it again. That's a car?
Yeah. Yeah, but those are the funny things that we pass down, and it demonstrates a little bit of who we are and where we came from.
I was going to say, though, and I've done a lot of what you're already talking about.
Sure.
Tonight, but listening to somebody talk on a video, not a video or on a tape recorder or that kind of thing, to me, and I say this to all these people here because I have a tape that my aunt did 3 90-minute tapes for my daughter years ago.
Yeah.
When she was in college. And listening to those tapes and hearing in her own words.
Yes.
And how she got sidetracked. But hearing her talk about it gave me an impression of who she was too. That I mean, I knew her all my life, but hearing her talk about some of these different things gives you a different impression than just recording something and writing it down.
Yeah.
And not having that recording to listen to her talking about it and her telling her story and how this was, and it was her interpretation of life.
Awesome. Yeah, that's absolutely right, and you're on page 2 of my outline.
I'm sorry.
No, you're right.
But, I mean,
you're
talking about talking to people and writing it down, but hearing some of it, on a tape is a lot different. You're sitting there asking questions, but you're hearing.
Absolutely, it is.
Their own words.
There is something about the human voice that we respond to on an emotional level that, in fact, they say that, researchers say that 93% of all communication is nonverbal. So I can write words out and you may misunderstand them because you can't hear any of the tone of my voice when you say, it's a text message. That's one of it is the most shallow form of communication because you get no context. It's right there. You have no emotional background. You can't hear the tone of voice. You can't see the look on their face. I love you. I love you. I love you. All of those nuances, and how many of you have said things to your husband is you're fine, do whatever you want. And the guy goes, oh, okay. Meanwhile, you're going, you do and you're dead. You're toast. All that nonverbal gets lost. And so I have the toolkit, which I'm going to get to here, where we organize the stories into, we'll get the stories organized, and I'll show you how this works in just a minute. And it's, to start with, you can write them all down, you can get all the stories out on cards, and then you could turn it into a book if you wanted. You could turn it into a blog or a series of emails or whatever. But to have somebody tell the stories in their own voice, in their own words, on an audio tape is that much more powerful, because you hear what's not being said. Okay? And then in my business, GenerationBridge Media, where we capture it on video, there's an entirely other level that you get, and that's you see what's not being said. And you get some of these ladies that I've gotten interviewed, and even some of the guys too. The guys are a little more straightforward, but some of the ladies will sometimes they'll not say something, but they'll give you that look that suggests there's more to this story that I'm permitted to say than I feel liberty to say on video. But just know, there's more to this. And when you see that look, you know what that is. And so I'm actually, I filled time a little more effectively than I thought it was going to. But I want to show you, I put this together because what I would find is that I would get people in front of the camera and they wouldn't know, no, trust me, people laugh when I'm talking all the time. I get it, you're not going to throw me. But what I find is that if you put somebody in front of the camera and they haven't thought about it, or then they sit there and they go, well, let's see, back in 1960, was it 3 or was it 4? This is it's a series of memory prompts that I put together. The first page actually is here to explain what all the other pages are. It's a short outline that just says, these are the different tools. The reason there are different tools is because there's different personalities, and there's different ways of thinking, and there's different ways of remembering. Some people are very visual, and so that's why I created the story behind the photo. And so if I took 20 photos from your life, any 20 photos from your life, could you tell me the story behind those photos? What are the photos from our life? If you could pick 20 photos from your life to give us an outline of what your life was like, what would those photos be?
Graduation photos.
High school or college graduation, yeah. Wedding, big one, yep. Baby pictures, the birth of children, the graduations of children, the vacations and trips we've taken. What's that? There was one other. Vacations, yeah. Honors, places I've worked. I've got a picture of my son. He started down at James Avery back in October, and I was such a nerd dad. I may as well have been the mom. But when he got out of the car and I said, wait, stand right here. I want to take your picture in front of the James Avery sign on your first day of work at your new job. I was such a nerd. But it was cool, and we have that, and he put it up on his Facebook. I put it on my Facebook. I was like, wow, look at that. What kinds of pictures do we put on our Facebook feeds? But here's the thing. Now I want to know the story behind it. And so the first worksheet, what I would do is I would pull out 20, or you can do as many as you want, but 20 is usually a pretty good starting place. When was this picture taken? Where was it taken? What was the occasion? So in the case of a wedding photo, let's just start with something obvious. This picture was taken on my wedding, July 3rd, 1949, or in my case, December 21st, 1997. Where was it taken? Cape Coral United Methodist Church in the sanctuary. What was the occasion? My wedding, dummy. Who was there? Now we're starting to get into something interesting. Sometimes the funny story from a wedding is who wasn't there, or who was there that shouldn't have been there, or who wasn't there that should have been, or who was sitting on what side of the sanctuary. You know, when you get politics going between families, you know, the Browns and the Johnsons, they're sitting on different sides of the, well,
Or you're divorced and your kids get married and you've got this
oh,
spouse.
you've got the ex-spouse on the other side of the thing. Oh, yeah. And now we've got a generation where both kids have come from divorced families and remarried families, and they got his and hers ex-spouses and So mine was interesting because the maid of honor didn't really even know my wife. They'd met a little bit. They weren't friends, but they were my friends. And she was very pregnant. So she's in the picture. She's very pregnant. It was a last-minute wedding. It was one of those quick, we're just going to get this done and get it over with and get on with our lives. There was nothing questionable about it. We're in a hurry. We just wanted to get on with our lives. But the guy standing in the back was a guitar player. He played in my band. I needed some music. I wasn't going to pay an organist, so I had the guitar player. He just played for the whole service. And one of her friends brought flowers, and one of her co-workers donated the dress, the little white tea dress. It was fabulous. It was a hat, the whole thing. It was amazing. And, you know, Janet was there, and so it was good friends. So who was there? Okay, what do you remember? So these things, these memories start to pop up from not only who was there, but why were they there, and what funny thing or what interesting thing came about from them being there. And then what was happening when this picture was taken? Well, in a wedding photo, that's pretty obvious. But then you start to think about the reception, and you start to think about the honeymoon, and the honeymoon, oh my gosh. We stayed at the worst little Holiday Inn down by the river. Oh my gosh, what a mess that was. And I had to work the next morning because I couldn't get the time off because it was, anyway. And then the last question there is, what do you want people to remember about that day? Because there's a story there. The facts are interesting, but what's the story? You know, if I was a journalist and I were to cover an event, I wouldn't want to just know the facts. I'd want to know the story. I'd want to know some of the context behind the story. So there's a little bit of journalism that goes into this, and some of it is just, you know, you can interview the people that were involved, but a lot of the time, what you want is you want to cultivate the story that you kind of have buried in your heart from that time. So we're cultivating, what do you want to remember about that day? I want people to remember that we had a lot of fun, or I stood up to somebody that had always challenged me, or I finally felt like I was giving my family the kind of vacation they deserved, or we had such a good time even though everybody was deathly sick the whole time. Those are the kinds of things that you call up. The next worksheet, what I did in the year blank. And you can do one of these, you just make copies of it, and you can do one for every year. So in the year 1968, I wasn't, but you know, some of y'all were. So I would say 1984, I turned 13 that summer. So in January, this happened. February, these things happened. March, nothing happened. April, there was this event. And May, you start to remember specific events throughout the calendar year. So you could do this year by year and say, well, let's see, that was the year I graduated from, let's see, I was in 7th grade that year. So if I go to 1989, okay, 1989, I graduated from high school in June. So prom was in, forget me. And then that concert that I did, I was part of the concert, the band. We had the big concert in April, and that was kind of neat. And then my dad came into town for that. And so you start to go back through your calendar, and then one thing will prompt another, and one memory will start to call up another. And you start to remember not just the events, but the emotion behind them. What were you feeling? I felt invincible. I felt like I could do just about anything. I was 17. Give me a break. I had a car and a job. And 2 prom dates at different schools on adjacent weekends. We don't need to talk about that. A few of my favorite things is the next worksheet. And this is a 2-part worksheet because it's not in any particular order. And you don't have to do these in order. But one of my favorite birthday presents or Christmas presents or holiday presents that I always remember, maybe it was a bike or it was a doll or it was a pony, Some of you may have received real estate. I don't know. My favorite present, my favorite subject in school, my favorite teacher. I had one guy say, he looked at this and he said, what was my favorite? We'll get to this later on, but he remembered the color of the walls in the classroom, and all of a sudden he could smell that classroom. And then all of a sudden he remembered the girl on his left and the guy in the desk on his right, and the things that they used to say, and then he remembered the playground, and then he remembered some of the lessons he learned, and all these memories started flooding back one after another, the crazy lunch lady, and all this stuff that would happen. And one memory started to trigger all these others, and he started to call up some things. You'd be surprised. You may get into there and realize you've got some hard feelings against somebody you just need to forgive. I am personally familiar with people who have been healed of disease because they forgave somebody. And there is a lot of medical research now starting to come out that unforgiveness is the root of a lot of chronic diseases, even cancer, heart disease, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, or inflammation, arthritis, and things like that, where you have a lot of chronic pain all the time. Sometimes you can be tied to unforgiveness or hard feelings or just bitterness, because it just creates this. Anyway, we'll get into it. That's a different class. Favorite musicians, favorite song to dance to. What was some of you, I don't know, some of you had some pretty good dance moves back in the day, and maybe some of you still do. Favorite jobs I've had, favorite vacations I've taken. My favorite thing to call my spouse. Keep it nice. Hey, stupid is not, no. My favorite romantic memory. Favorite dishes my parents made. Some of you, your mom had that one thing that when you came home, when you visited home, mom always made that one thing. You say, Mom, make the pot roast. Or Mom, make the enchiladas. Or whatever it is that's in your family. Some of you have that favorite recipe that your parents made. And I say parents, it might be, maybe your dad made something. My stepdad can cook anything, and it's awesome. My dad was a cook at one point too in a restaurant, and he made eggs that will blow your doors off. So it's not just necessarily mom. What's your favorite thing to cook? What's your favorite weird thing that you've eaten? Anybody calamari? Any squid eaters here? Been to Japan? You, Linda, you eat some funny things in Lebanon?
We ate the world's best ramen.
Ooh, yeah.
It was in Beirut, Lebanon. We figured we never had to have it again.
I had some food in Lebanon. I never have to have it again. My favorite toy when I was little. The next worksheet, and again, you'll notice that each of these worksheets calls up a different part of the memory. Or it might, some people like to be real linear. They like to follow the calendar. The what I did in the year X, that worksheet is for them. But people who remember this item or this, or I remember music or whatever, each one pulls from a different part of the brain. Major life changes. This is just a matter of facts. In 1978, we moved to this house. In 1987, we moved to this house. 1989, I moved to college. 1993, I moved to Fargo. 1995, I moved here. I took this job. So it could be moves, it could be marriages, it could be births, it could be deaths, it could be remarriages, it could be career changes, it could be retirement. Whatever those major life milestones are, and it's independent, it's personal for every certain person. For some people, the family relationship milestones are the only ones that matter. For some, it's their career. They look over the milestones of their career. Some people, it's games that they won, or it's particular bets that they won or lost. Whatever those major milestones are. There's career changes, other changes. World events in your lifetime. Think back. How many remember the explosion of the Challenger? We just celebrated an anniversary of that. How many of you know exactly where you were when Kennedy was shot? How many of you know exactly where you were when Apollo 11 landed on the moon? Some of these different milestones, these mile markers, some of you may remember when the boys came back from Korea. I don't imagine anybody here remembers when anybody came back from Germany. From Vietnam. Right. Did you have a brother? Or a,
No, my husband was in Vietnam,
Mhm.
but I didn't know him then.
Okay.
But we watched it on TV.
Sure, sure. And you remember those milestones. You remember the speeches. You remember, for some people, when the U.S. hockey team beat the Russians in 1980, they know right where they were. I met a lady in Alaska. We did an interview. Her husband worked on the crew of ABC Sports. He was a camera operator at that game. She knows exactly where she was sitting. And you know, when you have those milestone moments that line up to world events, Beirut has some pretty significant milestones in it. Sweden or Norway, I mean, each of these places has some specific historical milestones, and you can talk about, on this worksheet, let's put your life in the context of global events. I always think that's fun. I had a high school yearbook, and maybe a lot of high school yearbooks did this, but one that I saw in particular, the first several pages were news stories from that year. Major news stories. They took clippings from the newspaper and magazines, covers of Time, covers of Newsweek and things like that. So we knew right where we were that year. Where did we line up in the grand scale of things? You know, I grew up during the Carter, Reagan, Bush, and then on. But you know, I grew up during the Reagan years. Some people grew up during the Nixon years. My parents grew up during the Johnson, Kennedy years. And so those kinds of global life, you know, global events and where your life kind of fits into the context of all those. And this is where we get into school memories. Now this is two parts of school memories, and this is one where this can call up some of the most detailed memories. What were the classrooms like at your elementary school? What was the playground like? Mine was all grass until I was in 4th grade, and then they paved just the area right behind the school, but it was all still grass out beyond that. They had a whole thing of tires in one area. Okay, what was that like? What happened there? You might find that some of these things are therapeutic. You finally get to kind of make peace with some things that had bothered you about that. I can look back now, I'm approaching 50. I can look back on things that happened that to me were traumatic at the time, but now I go, I was a kid. It would not be a big deal now. Knowing what I know now, it's not such a big deal. But back then, it felt like trauma. And we'll talk about junior high and middle school. What were those classrooms like? What did you do for fun? What kind of activities were you involved in? What about high school? Were you in sports? Were you in music? Were you in drama? Did you have a job? Some of these memories that call up specific people. I just got an invitation to my 30-year high school reunion last week. And in there was a list of people that they couldn't reach. And so if you've got contact information for any of these people, would you pass it along to them, because we don't have anything. And I remember going, he was my bully. She was the girl I really, 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 really desperately wanted to go out with. She was the one I ended up with. You know, and you could go right down the list, and every one of those names was like, counseling, you know. All these memories that go along with all these names. Some of these names I have not seen or heard since 1989, and now all of a sudden I'm going, oh my gosh, you know, what are these people? And where are they now? And who am I now? Because that to me is just as interesting as, you know, if I were to get in front of Brian and Ed again, how would I be different? How would I handle that conversation now? So some of this is as much, for me personally, you know, as it is if I were to put somebody in front of me through these same kinds of questions. The last part of the worksheet is, it's actually 3 pages of questions. You will find they are not in any particular order. They just came randomly, and I did that on purpose. because if you start thinking in one frame, it's easy to get into a box with questions, and I'm only thinking about one piece of life and then I forget. But if I start pulling out things at random, because people don't remember in order. When I interviewed Laverne, we were, over an hour into the interview, we were talking about the 70s, and all of a sudden she remembered something about her uncle from the 1940s that was really important. Well, of course, you take that then in the video footage and you pop it in over here where it belongs, but it didn't come up until 1972. Well, why? Because we hadn't kind of dug up the soil yet. We hadn't broken up the soil yet for that to come out. And then when that came out, we just moved it and put it where it belonged. But people don't remember things in order, and I don't force them to. I don't ever ask them to. In fact, the nice thing about the 20 questions is we're just going to take one picture, tell me the story behind that one picture. And you can go off on a tangent with that. You can go in different directions with that or whatever. But I don't have to remember everything in order, because that gets confusing. And then if I remember something out of order, I don't feel like, oh shoot, that was from 1946 and now here I am in 74. What am I going to do? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe you're going to talk about this. So when you have all this stuff from this period and that, is there any way that you should organize it to put it together? I mean, that's the dilemma that I'm in.
Okay, so what are the shoulds? What are the absolute shoulds? No, you are absolutely right, because I'm done with this now. I want you to take that with you, and I hope that it's useful to you. I taught this course over at the Bud Holdsworth Library in August, and I had a man there, 82 years old, retired teacher. He'd been on the school board, he'd been a teacher, he'd done all these great things. And he came up to me afterwards with tears in his eyes, and he just said, I have been trying to write my life story, get my memoirs together for years. And I just didn't even know where to start. Now I feel like I've got the tools to get started. You know, I organized this, but I don't consider this something I made up. This is a gift to me, so I want it to be a gift to people as well. So
I have the tools now, I need to know how to go.
Right.
Where to go from there.
Okay. So you could. Here's something that goes out beyond the toolkit. Some people, what they'll do is when they remember a story, they'll write them on note cards. And then they'll date it, and then you can go back and you can put the note cards in order by date, if you want. Or you can group them by, these are family memories. Okay, these are with my parents, these are with my kids, and my siblings. These are holiday memories. Some people have really strong family Christmas traditions that go back generations. Okay, so we've got those stories. And some people, these are my career stories, and these are my retirement stories, and these are my raising kids stories. So whatever, if you want to group them by topic, or you want to group them sequentially, and this is the beauty of it, if you don't write it out linearly, you don't have to try to remember it in order. Can you imagine if we were still using typewriters and you remembered something out of order, and then you got to go back and insert, now I have a page 17A and B because I got stuff out of order. So if we put them on note cards, or we make copies of the different worksheets and we put them on those, and then you can organize them by year, by topic, or alphabetically, if that means something to you. You can organize them by, I don't know, I would think that either chronologically or by topic.
Well, I'm doing chronological because I put together family pictures and
Yes.
an album that shows my parents from the time they got married until I had home.
Right.
I've been writing on that,
Yes. And so that's why I recommend to people not to try to write it out linearly, like in a Word document, where, with a Word document, if you remember something,
that's what I do.
yeah, you can go
Go back and move it around.
Yeah, you could go back and move things around. For me, if I were doing this right now, I would put it on note cards, and I've got boxes of note cards, but I'd put them on note cards, and then, like if I were writing a novel, I wrote a screenplay. I'm so proud of myself. One of my bucket list goals was I was going to write a movie, and I did. But as I was writing it, I kept grinding to an absolute halt. So I started studying, researching how people did this, and the fact of the matter is, even in computers, they have software where you're putting it on note cards and pinning it on the board in order. And then you move things, and then you reorganize things, and no, this piece of the story needs to go here, and this, oh, you know, this really belongs over here, and this goes here, and oh, we don't need this one. And so you start to see, when you see it, there's something so visual about seeing things kind of in clusters and in pieces. Some people do brainstorm method where you start with a topic and then you branch out with, you know, and then you circle, these are the key topics. That's confusing to me. But to put things on cards and then lay them out on a table with pictures. And then I can go back and I've got just enough detail or an outline of topics on a card where then I can sit down and I can write out that story. This is a great process for blogging too. If you're into blogging, you get all your topics all laid out, then you put them in the order that you want them, and then you go topic by topic, and then you can write just about that one, and you can include the pictures about that one. And then if you want to create linkages between, now this is important to this story, or this is important, now you need to have this, you need to know this about Uncle Jeff, because that creates context for what happened at this wedding over here.
But where do you put that? Because that's my dilemma right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have these things I've written about my parents, kind of their characteristic things, but they're not necessarily related to any, they're related to the whole story, but they're not related, does that make sense?
Sure.
You know, in other words, you know, my mother cooked because it came with the job.
Right.
Okay, so that doesn't fit in any necessarily in any particular other place that I'm writing. So it's like, where do I put that?
Sure.
Does that make
Well,
sense?
if I had a detail like that, I would include it in a family story. Now, if I had a story that was a little more developed, like a holiday, then, because that would actually add to some of the humor. Now, in the summer of 1973, we had all, now that would be Christmas. Let's say we had Christmas in 1973. All of us were home from school. My sister was home with her kids, and we were all there. And Mom was in the kitchen because that's just came with the job. She didn't want to be there necessarily. She didn't enjoy it. Or even if she did, she just did it because it was the right thing to do. That tells me some things about her character.
Which is what I was trying to point out.
Yeah.
But there's all these other things, and it just doesn't seem like it fits. I mean, it could fit in a multitude of places.
Sure.
Yet, I'm just wondering if I can't put it in, you know, giving this characteristic overview, kind of, you know, this is who my mother was, or what I see her as, or
You
what my
bet.
mother was, or whatever. But I didn't know where to put it.
If you were going to write a story about your family life, and now I'm going to talk about, and novelists will do this, they'll start talking about a character, and they'll develop out that character. You know, he was this height and this weight, he had come from this background. They give you just enough background about the character to establish, now you understand why he does some of the things he does. So I would set aside a couple of paragraphs, 2 or maybe 3 paragraphs in one chapter. If I was talking, you could do it at the very beginning. You can put it wherever it feels right, and maybe just take a section where I just talk about establishing who Mom is. That's a chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 kind of thing that I would do. Because then, when I get down here and I'm talking about my college graduation and this thing that happened with Mom, I have this context back here. And I can take a sentence out of there. Remember, Mom cooked because that was just part of the deal. So that's a way that you can create linkage between them. One thing that people do now, I see more and more of this, to write a book, is they will write a blog. And they'll take, each blog is a story. It's a piece of the puzzle. And then when it's all done, they just take all these blogs that they've written and they copy and paste them into a document and they put them in the order that makes sense to them, which is very much, it's like a digital version of the note card where I've got all of these stories out here, and they're not in any maybe necessarily particular order, or they were and then I got off track and now I've got this, you know, whatever, I've got all these pieces. Now I can put them in order the way I see fit. And if I get in and go, this isn't developing the way I want, let's try it a different way, because now I've got them either on cards or in individual blog articles or whatever that might be. So, did I handle your question? Yes, ma'am.
I've become sort of a keeper of the family pictures.
Yes.
So that might be a good place for me to start.
Yes.
Like, okay, group my pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and then write the story.
Yes.
And
You are what this company was founded for. Because every family has a record keeper or a keeper of the family memorabilia. You've got the turkey, Thanksgiving turkey handprint from your son from when he was 5 years old up on the fridge. And now he's 35 and you have his son's picture next to it. Yeah.
You give it to your kid because you said, okay, it's time for you to have it.
That was, yeah, so that's an old joke that I've told with this for a long time, but I'm finding, like, even with my own mom, my mom was down in November and she brought a trunk full of my memorabilia that she had been keeping at the house. She said, it's yours now. Thanks, I needed something for the fire. But you are the keeper.
Somebody is gonna want it.
Yes.
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
That's the issue with family stuff, is that when you are RV full-time, because
Uh-huh.
that's when I did, you know, most people that RV full-time give up, they sell everything, they get rid of everything. Okay, we got rid of a lot of stuff, but I kept all of my family memorabilia and all that.
Mhm.
So, well, your kids aren't gonna want all of that kind of stuff. And I go, yeah, I understand that. There's some things that I know that my kids want, and some things that I'm sure that they'll just say, why did mom keep it?
right.
But, you know, that was me, and I knew I was gonna have a house again.
Yes.
A lot of people don't, and I have a house again, so I have all my memorabilia.
Well, in every family,
The recording where it came from.
that's the important thing.
Pictures it and saying, okay, this came from whatever.
Every family has their memorabilia, and every family has the one or two people that are responsible or who take responsibility because it means something to them. They're the ones with the emotional anchor to it. Well, then they have kids that don't have an emotional anchor. How do you create that anchor that now passes this spoon, this engraved spoon? How do you pass it down to grandkids that don't care? By telling them the story by will. You give them, you will it to them, and then it ends up, no, you tell them the story that goes along with it. This is why this is important.
But you reach a point where I had a huge doll collection.
Mm-hmm.
3 granddaughters, and I said, okay, it's time, I've had enough, okay, divide them up. And I wrote a note and it said, okay, this is where this came from.
Ah,
And I said,
yes.
okay, now there's 3 of you, 2 of them are sisters and one's the cousin. And I said, hey, if you don't want it, you offer it to this one. If this one doesn't want it, you offer it to the other one. And if none of them want it, that's the way it is.
Off it goes, right.
You know, so I have to look at it.
But then even if you take it to Goodwill, take it with the story tucked in the pocket. Write the story out and tuck it along with it, because who knows? It might end up at the Smithsonian. Somebody goes, oh my gosh, this is a 1957, rockabye baby doll. And, oh look, there's a story. I don't know anything about baby dolls, but
Picture of grandma holding it.
with a picture, look at this picture. Yeah, so here's a picture that goes with, and here's the story of how this passed through. The things that end up in the Smithsonian, somebody jotted down the story. Now, it may have been a historian, or it may have been in the film, or it may have been in some piece of popular culture, so everybody knows about it, but every family has got a Smithsonian of artifacts that are important to them, and somebody needs to document that.
I had a picture of my grandmother with the doll.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, a picture of grandma.
I had a picture forever. I had this
Yeah.
picture of my grandmother with this doll. And I played with this doll when I was a child.
Yeah.
I had the picture around. All of a sudden one day I'm looking at the picture going, oh my God, here's my grandmother with this doll.
Uh-huh.
And so now I can connect.
You are connecting the dots. I called the company GenerationBridge, and here's why. Because I am a bridge to 2 or 3 generations in front of me, but I'm also a bridge 2 or 3 generations before me. And if this great-grandchild down here wants to know where he got the nose from, I'll show him the picture. I'll show you where the family nose came from. Because in my family, one of the branches of my family, there's a family nose, and you can't get away from it. So we are coming down to the end. I have one funny story that I like to close with, and it's a mother is visiting her married daughter. She's visiting in her home, and they're getting the Thanksgiving ham ready. And the mother cuts off the end of the ham and puts it in, and the daughter goes, "Why did you cut the end off the ham?" And the mother said, "Oh, I don't know, Mom always did it." "Well, why did Mom always do it? Why did Grandma always cut that?" "I don't know." So they call, "Hey, Grandma, why did you cut the end off the ham?" "Oh, well, sweetheart, I couldn't even tell you. I just learned it from my mother. My mother always cut the end off the ham." And so then they call great-grandma at the home. And they say, "Great-grandma, why did we cut the end off the ham?" And great-grandma looks up in a rocking chair and she said, "You dummy, it didn't fit in the pan." Everybody's got a story. And so I want you to take the toolkit, use it if it's helpful to you. God bless you. I hope that you can take it, and it calls up some great stories. If it does nothing else, it can foster a conversation then that you can have with your parents, if they're still with us, or with your children, or with your siblings.
Everybody remembers the same incident differently.
Everybody, oh, I tell you what, you want to talk about fun. I want to do one of these videos one of these days. I want to get all of the siblings in different rooms. I want to interview them separately about the same incident and then patch those stories together. I did a wedding video one time. This was so much fun. I got the bride and the groom. I interviewed them separately and I asked them the same questions. And then when I got home, I took his answer and her answer and his answer and her answer, and I wove them back and forth. And son of a gun if they didn't get them all right. Because we were looking for those aha. We wanted to see those kind of those funny moments where he remembered it one way. There's a couple where he remembered it one way and she remembered it maybe just a little bit different. But there was some fun with that. Was this helpful to you? Did you walk away feeling like you took something with you? Great. There's two things that I want to give you and need to give you. This is for me. The Dietert Center has asked me, and I forgot it in my last class, if you would take this, hand one around. This is an evaluation of the course. They want to know if I did a good job and if you feel like you got something out of it.
Sometimes it just feels overwhelming, but maybe we should just give ourselves permission to do one story.
See, that's the thing. Oh, yes, that is such a good point. I want you to feel free to give yourself permission to not do it all. And it's easy to I got to get the whole house clean. We're going to get the whole house clean. Everything is going to be perfect. And you get into one bookcase and you're toast. This shouldn't be like that. This should be, let's get one story from Mom. In fact, I'm going to set up my iPhone and just turn on record, and I'm going to ask her the question, and whatever comes out, comes out. And if we never do it again, that's okay. We got one. Because once you do one, you'd be surprised how easy the second one is. And hey, you know what? We should get together for coffee. Tell you what, Mom, let's get together for coffee every Tuesday, and I will ask you a new question, and you just tell me, you just answer that one question, tell me the story behind it, and we'll go from there.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Because you heard me say earlier, I
Yeah.
had this tape from my aunt.
Yeah.
Which I've transcribed.
Wow.
And I've transcribed stuff that my mother, did for me when she was still living.
Such a Girl Scout, so resourceful.
I'm the family resource.
I know.
How important is it, if you're writing a family history,
Uh-huh.
to, I have all these facts, okay, my aunt told me this, my mother told me that,
Uh-huh.
How important is it to have that in their own words written or left to the family, as opposed to taking it out of context. In other words, if I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna write this story about my grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
and my aunt is telling me about the early life of the family, okay, how important is it to, or what's the best way, or maybe there isn't one.
Sure.
Do I take it in her words, or do I take it and say, oh, okay, and I write it in my own way of,
Mhm.
of giving the same information?
It's the difference between biography and autobiography. And autobiography is in their words. It's the actual person telling it in their words. And at that point, you're just transcribing the story like you did with your aunt. But if you're telling the story, there may be times where you know enough of the actual quote to quote it verbatim. But otherwise, the expectation with biography is that you get across the heart of the story as the biographer understands it. So that's what you're doing, is you're telling the story about what happened from a third person perspective. So for you to impart the facts, the details of the event, because even if you got it from one person, you're only getting that one person's perspective of the facts anyway. So don't feel any discomfiture in just capturing it in your own words. As I understood it from talking to these family members, this is how I understand the whole story.
How do you write that? You write it in the first person, or I mean, I don't know, do I say, Aunt so-and-so said, I mean, you
Mhm.
say, how many times do
Okay.
I say that?
Sure.
You know?
There's two ways to approach that. One of them is the story method, where you are just the narrator telling, and the princess and Prince Charming went into the woods and they met the frog and they did all this. You are narrating a story. There is also a type which is documentary style, which is, I interviewed Aunt Jessie, and Aunt Jessie said this and this and this. And then, Grandma told the story of all these times this happened, and this was Jessie's perspective. That's more documentary style. It's a little more officious, and it's information. And there is certainly a place for that. There are documentaries, there are biographies of Ben Franklin, for example, or Abraham Lincoln. There are hundreds of biographies of Abraham Lincoln. And some of them are records of facts and interviews and textual citations from, those are textbooks. And then you've got biographies that are story form. And those are a little more enjoyable to read. I might not cite them as sources if I were doing, a term paper, but they are more personal. They're more, for some people, more. Every book is one person's interpretation, so it really becomes up to the writer to determine in their heart from the outset, how much do I want to just tell the story that I know, and how much do I feel obligated to state all the facts and cite all my sources like I'm, documenting the whole thing. And so that becomes a matter, that's a personal decision. You can say, I really feel like I have to document everything. Or you can just, I want to tell this story. Now, Aunt Betsy had this fantastic anecdote about it that I'm going to include here. You don't have to say all that, but what you're saying is, there's a funny story that comes from Aunt Betsy. And you tell it all out the way she told it. But otherwise, you're just telling the story as you understand it. So I can see that you like facts, you like precision, you like things to be orderly, you like things to be systematically cited properly. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But if you walk away feeling like you have told the story accurately, then you got the product you wanted. So that really comes down to, what story do I want to tell?
So so when you're addressing it, do I say mom and dad, or do I call it, grandma and grandpa, or do I call it by their first, the person, I mean, that's.
Oh, sure.
Okay, does that make sense?
Well, if I were going to differentiate between talking about my parents as mom and dad, or grandma and grandpa, or Greg and Bonnie, really depends on who I want my audience to be. If I'm writing it for my grandkids, if I'm writing it for my kids and their kids, I would probably say Grandma Bonnie and Grandpa Greg. Because it's how the audience would know them best. Now, if I was writing it to share with their siblings, it's Sue, Jeff, Greg, Bonnie. And so it really then, since I'm presenting it to the generations that are yet to come, I am going to present them in terms that these are going to understand. And if you want, if you wanted to say it this way, if you're talking to 3 generations down the line, you want to talk about my mom and my dad, or just say, Mom and Dad told me. Now you're writing in the first person. If you're writing in the first person, you're going to talk about them the way you knew them. If you're going to talk about them third person, Grandma Bonnie, Grandpa Greg, Aunt Joyce, Aunt,
Some of it is third person because some of it is past events of things that I wasn't there.
Sure. And that is a personal interpretation at that point. It's however you feel it's going to be best communicated, or they're going to understand who all the key players are.
You can change your perspective or whatever you would call it.
Sure.
Because really you'll have to if you're going to talk about people that you didn't really know.
Right. And so if I'm telling a personal story about a time I remember with my parents, I can write about that one way that I can't write about 2 generations prior because I wasn't there. And so at that point, unless you're sending this to HarperCollins to have it published,
No.
you make it your way. If you decide to go with to make it into a book, Amazon, Kindle Direct Press. I'm actually writing a book for a client right now. We're going to go to Amazon Direct Press, and what they'll do is you download a piece of software, you put all your text into it, and then they format it and they prepare it for pre-production and press, and you design a cover, send it off, and 48 hours later you get the book in the mail. So lots of possibilities with that. Well, I believe that I have taken the time that you have allocated and promised to me. So thank you so much for. Yeah, if you fill out that little questionnaire, I can take them. Otherwise, you can drop them off at the front desk, or you can mail them in later if you don't really feel like it. I can take them. I won't read them. This is between you and the Diedert Center. No. I really thought I was better than that. No. But thank you all just for being so kind and for listening so intently and for offering your contributions to the conversation. I hope that you enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you all.